Hello everyone. In learning outcome number 3 of module 6, we're going to be covering the immune response. Therefore, how our body protects itself from foreign pathogens, for example. So the goal of the immune response is basically the destruction or the inactivation of pathogens, like I said, also abnormal cells, and even foreign molecules such as toxins. The immune system can be divided into two overlapping mechanisms to destroy all these pathogens and toxins that we talked about. The first one is what we call the innate immune response, which is going to be relatively rapid but non-specific, and thus it's not always very effective. And the second one is what we call the adaptive immune response, which is slower in its development during an initial infection with a pathogen, but then it becomes highly specific and effective at attacking a wide variety of pathogens once our body has already been exposed initially to this pathogen. As we can see from this image, there is an overlap of the cells that belong to the innate immunity or the adaptive immunity. These are the gamma delta T cells and the natural killer T cells. Now, the gamma delta T cells, they are basically a prototype of an unconventional T cell, and it represents a relatively small subset of T cells in the peripheral blood. And the natural killer T cells, which are lymphocytes that express both a T cell receptor, which is characteristic of the adaptive immunity, and surface receptors for the NK cells, which are part of the innate immune system. Therefore, it belongs to both the innate and the adaptive immunity. Within the innate immunity, we have cells that you probably have heard already about. We did talk about already in this course, which are the macrophages, the eosinophils, the neutrophils, and the basophils. The dendritic cells, they are actually closely related to the macrophages, so they will have an important role in the anti-infectious defense mechanism that our body presents. With regards to the adaptive immunity, we have two main cells, which are the T cells and the B cells. There are several different types of T cells. The two main important ones are what we call the CD8 positive T cells. They're also called the cytotoxic T cells, and the CD4 positive T cells, which are also known as helper T cells. And the B cells, they will give rise to these plasma cells, which can also be called plasmocytes. And the plasmocytes are the ones that will produce antibodies. And this is why this is a slow response, because they still need to differentiate into other cells that will then create a specific immune response for each specific pathogen. So let's see how this happens for each of these different types of cells. Any discussion of the innate immune response usually begins with the physical barriers that prevent the pathogens from entering the body, then destroy them after they enter, or actually flush them out before they can establish themselves in the host. In fact, the barrier defenses, they are part of the body's most basic defense mechanisms. Therefore, we can say that the barrier defenses, they are not a response to infections, but they actually are continuously working to protect against a broad range of pathogens. So the different modes of barrier defenses are going to be associated with the external surfaces of the body, where the pathogens may try to enter. So the primary barrier to the entrance of the microorganisms in the body is going to be the skin, because this is our most external surface. Not only is the skin going to be covered with a layer of dead keratinized epithelium that is too dry for the bacteria to grow, but as these cells, they are continuously shedding from the skin, they will carry the bacteria and other pathogens with them. And additionally, we have sweat and other skin secretions that may lower the pH. They can contain toxic lipids and actually physically wash microbes away. Another barrier can be the saliva in the mouth that will contain lysozymes, which are enzymes that destroy the bacteria by digesting the cell walls. Also, the acidic environment of the stomach, which is actually fatal to many pathogens, is also a barrier. Additionally, we can have the mucus layer of the gastrointestinal tract, the respiratory tract, the reproductive tract, the eyes, the ears, and the nose. They all trap both microbes and debris, and they do facilitate their removal. In the case of the upper respiratory tract, we are going to have the ciliated epithelial cells. Remember, these are called the ciliated columnar epithelial cells that will move potentially contaminated mucus upward to the mouth, and we will talk more about this when we get to the respiratory system. And then if it's in your mouth, it will be swallowed, and then it will fall into your stomach. And we already said that the stomach is too acidic for the pathogens to grow. Therefore, it will be destroyed in that way. Lastly, the presence of our natural flora or normal flora, which is located in the digestive system and contains natural bacteria that helps with digestion. They're going to be important because they will compete with the foreign bacteria that are trying to enter our body, and this prevents the foreign bacteria from replicating inside of our body. Now, a phagocyte is a cell that is able to surround and engulf a particle or a cell in a process that's called phagocytosis. The phagocytes of the immune system, they will engulf other particles or cells, either to clean an area of debris or to remove old cells or to even kill pathogens such as bacteria. The phagocytes, they are the body's fast-acting first line of immunological defense against organisms that have breached the barrier defenses and have entered the vulnerable tissues of the body. And this image explains how the phagocytosis process works. So first, you need to have a microbe that enters the body that needs to be destroyed. So it passed through the skin, it passed through the mucosal lining, and now it's inside of the body and it needs to be destroyed. So once it enters, it will bind to a receptor on a cell. Which cells are these? Well, these are, for example, the macrophages and the neutrophils. And after the binding between the microbe and the surface cell receptor, the microbe will then get engulfed, forming this vesicle that will contain the microbe. And this vesicle is known as a phagosome. And after the formation of the phagosome, it will merge with a lysosome to form what we call a phagolysosome. And these lysosomes, they are membrane-enclosed organelles that contain enzymes which are going to be capable of breaking down all different types of microbes. Therefore, the enzymes that are present now in the phagolysosome, they will be able to digest the microbe. In other words, they will be able to destroy that microbe. And at the end of the phagocytosis process, the microbial products, they get released out of the cell into the interstitial space where it can go into the lymphatic capillaries and therefore get removed that way. Therefore, we can say that the phagocytosis is going to be an important and very effective mechanism of destroying pathogens during the innate immune response. The other type of cell that we have in the innate immune response are the natural killer cells, which are a type of lymphocyte that will have the ability to induce apoptosis, which is programmed cell death in cells that are infected with intracellular pathogens such as bacteria and viruses. Now, the natural killer cells, they will recognize these cells by mechanisms that are still not well understood, but that presumably will involve their surface receptors. So the receptors will bind to the pathogens, and they will induce apoptosis, in which there's going to be a cascade of events inside of the cell that will cause its own death. So that's how they will get rid of these bacteria or viruses. Innate immune responses and early induced responses, they are in many cases ineffective at completely controlling the pathogen growth. However, they do slow pathogen growth and allow time for the adaptive immune response to strengthen and either control or eliminate the pathogen. The innate immune system, they also send signals to the cells of the adaptive immune system, guiding them in how to attack the pathogen. The specificity of the adaptive immune response, which basically is its ability to specifically recognize and make a response against a wide variety of pathogen, is in fact its greatest strength. And this is why it can also be called specific immunity. Now, it can also be referred to as acquired immunity, and this is due to the fact that your body needs to build this defense mechanism, meaning that you're not born with it. In other words, you are acquiring this immune defense mechanism, as it is built specifically for each pathogen. Now, pathogens, they will contain antigens, which are that small chemical groups that are often associated with pathogens, and these antigens are the ones that will be recognized by the receptors on the surface of the B and the T lymphocytes. And this adaptive immune response to these antigens, it is so versatile that it can respond to nearly any pathogen. And this increase in specificity, it comes because the adaptive immune response has this unique way to develop as many as 100 trillion different receptors to recognize nearly every conceivable pathogen. Now, isn't this amazing? It's mind-blowing. Now, there are 2 steps to this adaptive immune response. Therefore, the first exposure to a pathogen is what we call a primary adaptive response. And symptoms to this first infection are called primary disease, and they're always relatively severe because it takes at least a couple of weeks for an initial adaptive immune response to a pathogen to become very effective. And upon re-exposure to the same pathogen, there's going to be a secondary adaptive immune response which is going to be generated, and this one is going to be stronger and faster than the primary response because the cells have already been sensitized to this type of pathogen. So the secondary adaptive response often will eliminate a pathogen before it can cause any significant tissue damage or any symptoms because it acts on it right away. And without symptoms, there's no disease. And the individual is not even aware of an infection sometimes. Now, this secondary response is the basis of what we call immunological memory, which basically is the fact that it protects us from getting diseases repeatedly from the same pathogen. And by this mechanism, an individual's exposure to pathogens early in life, it will spare this person from these diseases later in life. So this is why it's important when you're young to be exposed to as many pathogens as possible. And you can do this by letting children play in the dirt, for example, by interacting with other kids, by attending daycare. Definitely attending daycare will make them get sick a lot. And the more exposure they get, the better they are at building their immune system response to pathogens. Of course, this can only occur in individuals that are not immunocompromised. A third important feature of the adaptive immune response is its ability to distinguish between self-antigens, those that are normally present in the body, and foreign antigens, those that might be on a potential pathogen. As T and B cells mature, these are going to be mechanisms in place that will prevent them from recognizing self-antigens and therefore preventing a damaging immune response against its own body. And these mechanisms, they're not 100% effective. And when they are not 100% effective, then this can lead to what we call autoimmune disease. So, auto on itself, right? So, this means that the body will start attacking itself. And there are several different types of autoimmune disease.